Salam, shalom, and greetings of peace. My name is Raheel Raza, and I will be your moderator for today's event. I'm president of the Council of Muslims Facing Tomorrow and co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement. With Zoom fatigue, the vaccine, and everything else that's been going on in these trying times, I wish you all good health and thank you profusely for being here. Welcome to the launch of the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, which we believe is the first global Muslim organization dedicated solely to fighting anti-Semitism in all its guises. I know there are people who will be logging in from India, Pakistan, parts of the Middle East, Israel, Europe, UK, Canada, and the USA. Each and every one of you is very important to us because your support will determine our success. Among our guests today, we are honored to welcome Eli Kohanim, who served as U.S. Deputy Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism at the U.S. Department of State, and who is now a visiting fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. Thank you, Eli, for joining us. It's an honor. My friends, anti-Semitism is pervasive, enduring, virulent, lethal. It is an evil that can only be fought by recognizing its distinctive dynamics and the threat it poses to humanity as a whole. We, as concerned Muslims, are determined to do just that. We deliberately chose to launch our organization on Israel's Holocaust Memorial Day, known in Hebrew as Yom HaShoah, as opposed to the UN-designated International Holocaust Remembrance Day on January 27th. We are doing so to make a point as loudly and clearly as possible. It is remarkable that the commemoration of Yom HaShoah has just started in Israel as we speak. It is also remarkable and an extraordinary special privilege to recognize in our audience Leslie Mezey, who is a Holocaust survivor and author of Tapestry of Survival. I've known Leslie for 25 years, and we have worked together on many projects. Thank you, Leslie, for your friendship and insights, and for being here today. The Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism will stand against what Irvin Kotler has described as the most pernicious aspect of modern anti-Semitism. And I quote him, "The singling out of Israel and the Jewish people for differential and discriminatory treatment in the international arena. In its most lethal form, it refers to the singling out of Israel and the Jewish people for existential or genocidal assault." End of quote. Mr. Kotler is in another webinar right now, so he sends his best wishes. This anti-Semitic demonization of the Jewish state is a common and central theme in contemporary extreme left-wing, extreme right-wing, and Islamist anti-Semitism. Your being here with us today gives us hope that together we can seize this opportunity to work unitedly to bring the world together. So please join us. We need your help in any form that you can deliver, whether it's physical, financial, or words of wisdom to spread the message. Let me introduce you to our steering committee and advisory board, who are from diverse backgrounds and fully committed to this cause. Rimel Khan, entrepreneur and communications professional. Sohail Raza, Director of the Forum for Learning and Director of Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow. Raheel Raza, President of the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow. Soraya Deen, Founder, Muslim Women Speakers Movement. Salman Seema, Student Leader and Human Rights Activist. On our advisory board, we have Noor Dahri, Executive Director, Islamic Theology of Counterterrorism, ITCT in the UK. Naeem Hassan, retired ambassador, political analyst, and public speaker from Oakville, Ontario. Shan Taseer, founder of Pakistan for All from Toronto. Dr. Elham Manea, Swiss Yemeni Muslim reformer who works at the Institute for Political Science at the University of Zurich. Dr. Zudi Jasser, founder of AIFD and the Muslim Reform Movement in the USA. And Zainab Al-Swaij, executive director, the American Islamic Congress, also in the USA. We have invited a group of dynamic speakers who have a complete understanding of the issues and believe in Muslim reform through education, engagement, enlightenment, and empowerment. Our first speaker is Soraya Deen, a Sri Lankan-born American. She is the founder of the Muslim Women Speakers Movement, co-founder of Peace Moms, promoting Christian-Muslim dialogue, and the co-founder of the San Fernando Valley Interfaith Solidarity Network. Soraya works internationally to empower women to counter violent extremism and is part of the Muslim Reform Movement. Soraya, you have traveled internationally and in many parts of the Muslim world, including the fact that you do a lot of work of reform in Sri Lanka. In your travels, what have you seen and discovered about anti-Semitism among a variety of global Muslims? And also my key question to you is the message of anti-Semitism also being spouted from the pulpit?
Shalom alaikum. Thank you, Rahel. Thank you for doing what you do, highlighting the virus of anti-Semitism. It is a pandemic, raging for many years. Unfortunately, though, we have no vaccine that can cure it. I am a firm believer that evil prevails when good people do nothing. The Holocaust happened, genocides continue to happen, and we are not immune to the same risks today. The tragedy of anti-Semitism is close to my heart. I have heard it, I have witnessed it, I have felt it, and I have been called upon to participate in it. According to the Anti-Defamation League, anti-Semitic incidents in the United States increased by 57% in 2017. 2018, the tragedy in Pittsburgh and in my own state of California, there were 1,800 hate crimes against Jews. 2019, an enormous upsurge of over 2,000 hate crimes committed against the Jewish people. When hate and racism are allowed to thrive against any one of us, it is an attack on every one of us. To all of you who are here and those of you who are listening to us from afar, we must make every effort, as Rahel said, at the national and the international level to marginalize and to stop these voices of hate and calling them out for what they are and what they represent is important. And I take a minute to applaud and support the work of the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism. The hatred for Jews, Rahel just said, I travel far, it's pervasive. There is a selective hesitancy in many parts of the world to investigate anti-Semitism. In the Muslim world, calling out and criticizing Islamists and political Islam, condemning anti-Semitism is perceived as a dishonor. One is blamed and one is shamed, often called an Islamophobe or as a self-loathing Muslim. It takes enormous moral courage to stay within the faith and call out on the Islamists who promote and those of who are silent on the face of anti-Semitism. There clearly is anti-Semitic incitement in American mosques. Radical imams and community members are spewing anti-Semitism in the US and globally with impunity. I must begin with my encounters in Jerusalem, where I would engage cab drivers and shopkeepers. And I often heard they say how much they hated the Jewish people. Some would say all Jews must go. They'd say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. There's always, of course, blanket opposition to Israeli government policies, and therefore the rationale was that all Jews must be punished or must go. This is deeply entrenched. This is a deeply entrenched mindset in the Muslim world. So we must fight this. In Sri Lanka, where I am from, where I was born, and I work very rigorously. One's support for Palestine determines whether you are a good and an acceptable Muslim or a bad one not fit to be a Muslim, or whether one is an Islamophobe or whether one is a self-hating Muslim. I myself have been called many names the minute I challenge Islamism, political Islam, and Islamists. I'm called a Zionist, a Jew lover, and they often say she's paid by the Zionists. And the blanket indictment is that all Jews are responsible for anything and everything the government of Israel does. And the challenge is real. When anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli discourse becomes entwined in many parts of the world, it produces hate. Anti-Semitic incitement in mosques is rampant in Sri Lanka. Jewish people are already disproportionately targeted, whether it is in Sri Lanka, a little island in South Asia, or in the United States, for hate crimes. But recent sermons could fan the flames of anti-Semitism. In November, the FBI released new data showing there were more Jewish victims of anti-religious hate crimes than any other religious group combined. Anti-Semitic incitement in the mosques in America must be a cause for concern, Rahil. You wanted me to address this. Radical imams and certain community members are spewing anti-Semitism, as I said, within the US. Not so long ago, Sheikh Ramadan El-Sabag of Garland, Texas, posted a recorded prayer on his Facebook page calling for Israel's destruction. Oh Allah, destroy the Zionists and their allies, to which people are supposed to have chanted, Amen, Amen. Oozing with anti-Semitism of the crudest kind, the Egyptian-born American Imam Ammar Shahim took the pulpit at the Islamic Center of Davis, California. Judgment day will not come until the Muslims fight the Jews and the Jews hide behind stores and trees. He continued, Oh Allah, he prayed, support the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Aqsa Mosque, and the rest of the Muslim lands. Oh Allah, liberate the Al-Aqsa Mosque from the filth of the Jews, he went on. And he said, Oh Allah, destroy those who close the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And Allah, show us the black day that you inflict upon them, the wonders of your ability. Do not spare anyone. Annihilate everyone. The stories continue. Born in Syria, an American citizen, Imam Sheikh Mohammed Hamoush, was preaching at another Islamic center in Riverside, 451 miles to the south. Allah, he said, Allah wants us to have jihad in our lives, no matter what and where we are. That is what is happening. Wake up, he thundered. It is time to be a Muslim. Prayers are not the only things. And then after more talks of the Al-Aqsa and its Jewish occupiers, he said, Oh Allah, destroy them, turn them into booty in the hands of Muslims. And right in the East Coast, New Jersey Imam Ayman El-Kasabi invoked martyrdom as a means to take revenge on the Jews whom he called apes and pigs. He then prayed for their annihilation, eliciting cheers from the Muslim men attending his New Jersey City mosque. Anti-Semitism, my friend, is not a Jewish problem only. It is a problem for all of us. Physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish property, towards Jewish community, their institutions, and religious facilities. In 2018, I remember with my friend Marsha Novak, we founded the Interfaith Solidarity Network, one of the largest interfaith organizations in San Fernando Valley, and of course, for which the city awarded us the Impact Makers Award. We were celebrating our annual march when we heard the tragedy in Pittsburgh, and we decided to dedicate the entire march to the victims, the 11 who perished, and the 6 others, including 4 law enforcement officers who were wounded during the shooting. Law enforcement negotiated with Robert Bowers while he was inside the synagogue. Sources said, and during these negotiations, he talked about his hatred for Jewish people. Bowers, of course, eventually surrendered. And this proves to us the pervasiveness, the tentacles this anti-Semitism has reached, not only internationally, but even within the United States. And all too often we forget. I want to take a moment and remember the victims of Pittsburgh. Let us remember Joyce Feinberg, Richard Gottfried, Rose Mallinger, Jerry Rabinowitz, Cecil Rosenthal, David Rosenthal, Bernice Simon, Sylvan Simon, Daniel Stein, Melvin Wax, Irvin Younger. Their crime? Attending a synagogue. Thank you, Rahel.
Thank you, Soraya. That was very insightful, also very concerning. The hate that is spewed from the pulpit of mosques is something that we have to put under our action plans as we move forward and look at how we can solve that problem. The IHRA definition of anti-Semitism will be the guiding formulation for CMAA. You can find this definition on our website, www.stopglobalantisemitism.com. We at CMAA reject any attempts to diminish the IHRA definition or to redefine anti-Semitism in a manner that undermines the IHRA. Such definitions, in our opinion, will be more useful to the anti-Semites than to our fight against anti-Semitism. I will now call upon our next speaker, Haras Rafiq. Haras is a trustee of the UK charity Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, MAAS, which shares our objectives and hence is a natural affiliate. He has been a counter-extremism and counter-terrorism practitioner since 2004. Haras has served as Quilliam International's CEO and as an executive board member. Haras, you said something very profound in our last conversation. You said anti-Semitism is not in Islam, but found in the DNA of Islamists, and it is fuel for extremists. Could you talk about anti-Semitism in the UK and your organization and further to what we've just said? Thank you.
Thank you, Raheel. Thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure, a real honor to be sharing this platform with my very distinguished co-panelists. And congratulations on setting up this much needed organization to tackle anti-Semitism. You were absolutely right with something you said earlier on. Anti-Semitism really, like extremism, is really being challenged and at danger from what I call the triple threat. The triple threat being far left extremism, far right populist extremism, and of course, Islamist theocracies. It is absolutely true that the anti-Semitism that we're seeing now amongst people who are fellow practitioners of the same religion that we all share, Islam, never had this problem of anti-Semitism within the Islamic faith. And of course, as Soraya said, it's anti-Semitism is being pushed now from the pulpit to make it almost a religious duty for Muslims to believe that they have to be anti-Semitic, they have to hate people who are Jewish, and they have to hate the state of Israel, and that's the only way they can survive and please God and be practicing Muslims. That is actually a lot of rubbish. And I want to talk a little bit about how anti-Semitism has been brought into Islam, how it's being manipulated for a political objective, and what exactly are the 7 key stages of narratives and behaviors that Islamists are driving Muslims to believe, to the point where it's no longer, I would go even one step further and say that it's fast becoming a major part of the DNA of ordinary Muslims and ordinary Islam as well, which is not Islamist. I said that anti-Semitism never existed within the Islamic traditions. Of course it didn't. There are many great examples of a concept called Israeliyat, which was something that the scholars, the Islamic scholars in the past, used to actually quote Jewish scholars and actually teach people how to be better human beings. And of course, they base this from the authentic hadith, which is haddatuhu anhum wala haraj, which basically means, and the hadith is basically a quotation from a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which basically means teach from them from which there is no harm. So of course, Muslims used to do that. Islamic scholars used to do that all the time. But of course, anti-Semitism was imported into the Middle East in the 1930s. We all know the history behind that, and Mufti Amini and many others, as a way of rebelling and retaliating against people who were escaping persecution in Europe into the Middle East. And of course, it suited the Nazis at the time to export this anti-Semitism. And it actually suited some of the so-called scholars at the time within the Middle East to bring that in as well, especially within the Israel-Palestine regions. So what is it that how are Islamists actually using this phenomenon, this hatred, to actually drive anti-Semitism within Muslim communities? And what kind of behaviors are they actually trying to instill? Well, the first one is the creation of the other, or what I call otherization, the creating of the other, dehumanization of the other. A belief that anybody who is not tribally part of the gang, if you like, and I say that in inverted commas, the Muslim Ummah gang, which is different to the Muslim Ummah or communities, the belief that anybody who is not the same of them is the other, and more so people who are Jewish. The second thing is the collectivization, that all people who are Jewish, whether they live in Israel, whether they live somewhere else, whether they're actually religious, whether they're not religious, are all the same. Then there is the oppression narrative, the belief that the Jews, Israel, and any other things that they can think of are actually the real reason why Muslims are being oppressed, not only in Palestine. If you go to places like Pakistan and you talk to people about their problems, everything is Israel and the Jews' fault. In fact, recently, I recall last year, the current Prime Minister, President Imran Khan, was being criticized by a mullah from the pulpit, and the biggest insult he could throw at Imran Khan, the leader, was that he is a Jew. The next one is the collective guilt, that every single person, whether they are Jewish or not Jewish, because they're not part of this gang, because they're not part of this, this tribal political bloc, if you like, is actually also part of the oppression, is complicit in the oppression. And that's the people on this panel, because we're not anti-Semitic, because we don't believe that somebody who is Jewish is actually to blame for the fact that my child couldn't get a good place in a university. But they actually believe and try to instill these behaviors. Then what they get to is where it gets really, really physically dangerous, the supremacism narrative, and then self-defense, and then violence is self-internalized. And this is done through an intellectual, ideological, social, emotional, and theological indoctrination. And in fact, it doesn't just apply to Muslims as well. Whilst we were sending out the publicity for this event, I don't know if some of my other panelists got lots of emails from racists. I certainly got some from people who were white, Anglo-Saxon, English people who were actually pushing back to say, and using all the Islamist rhetoric, the indoctrination that I've talked about, against me to say I'm not a proper Muslim. And then when I pushed back on him, I said, basically, you're actually using the Islamist definition to describe whether I'm a Muslim or not. But this is spreading very, very quickly and has been spreading. In fact, Comres did a survey here in the UK last year, and they identified that nearly half the Muslims in the UK, and I suspect this is something that actually is being duplicated and replicated around the world, are actually spreading conspiracy theories, whether it's online or whether it's in their day-to-day lives, whether it's religious, whether it's intellectual, ideological, etc., etc. This has to stop. So I wanted to make sure that I was actually here for this very, very important launch. I want to make a pledge on behalf of MAS, Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, which is a charity set up by 5 Muslims, to work with the council, to work in line with all the other organizations that I'm part of or represent in terms of countering extremism and countering terrorism, in actually doing a number of things. One is being consistent in calling out hatred, discrimination. If I see a lot of people who are Muslim who use the word Islamophobia, well, I reject that term, first of all, because we live in a liberal secular democracy, and Islam is a set of ideas, a set of values. No set of ideas or values in a liberal democracy should be beyond critique, even those that I believe in. However, no individual is beneath dignity. So I prefer anti-Muslim hatred. If we want to combat, we expect non-Muslims to actually get engaged in the struggle against discrimination against Muslims, and it does exist. How can we show our faces if we don't get involved in the struggle against hatred for individuals and people who are Jewish just because they're Jewish? So we've got to be consistent in calling out this hatred. And secondly, build these coalitions, build these alliances, work together as Muslims and non-Muslims before it gets too late. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Haras. That was very enlightening. I love what you said about building alliances, and I think that's part of what we are trying to do, is invite people to join us. We have to do this together, regardless of our political, ethnic, or religious affiliations. Thank you for those who have joined us late. Please remember that there is the recording of this webinar, and it will be available to you later on if you've missed any part of the beginning. The CMAA believes in the necessity and obligation of a Muslim voice to lead and initiate a unique movement committed to fighting this scourge, which must be without obfuscation, apologetics, or whitewashing. We ask you to join us and help us in this uphill struggle for peace and unity. Our next speaker is Asra Nomani, who is a former Wall Street Journal reporter and co-founder of the Pearl Project, which is advocating for justice for her colleague and friend Daniel Pearl. She is also co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement. Asra, I know that you have a very personal interest in fighting anti-Semitism and that you have been on this journey for many years, starting with your friendship with Daniel Pearl and continuing to find justice for him. So can you tell us about this journey?
Thank you so much, Raheel, and thank you for having me join this amazing group of brave Muslims. It shouldn't take a moment for us to do something like this. It shouldn't even take any courage. But the sad reality is that we are still facing a crisis in our Muslim community in which we have too much anti-Semitism. It is still being preached from the pulpit, and it is still the normative in our society. So as Soraya put very eloquently, we have to take this out of the mainstream. As Haras said very well, this is an institutional problem, and we have to have a systematic solution that eradicates all of this hate that we all know exists. What the folks who are joining us are able to witness here are Muslims who will own up to this problem. We will not deny it. We will not pretend it doesn't exist, and we will not justify it. You have all heard, very, very eloquently the societal problems. What I want to do is just bring it home a little bit for you. For me, I came to this country in the United States at the age of 4. I'm from India. And my first moment of experience as a child in American culture was when I was 10 and I was living in West Virginia, and I learned to square dance. My dance partner was a boy by the name of David Stitzel. He was with one of the few Jewish families in my hometown of Morgantown, West Virginia. Now, my mother didn't want me to learn how to square dance because of conservative ideas about dancing. She had absolutely no issue with the boy with whom I was going to dance or the fact that he came from a Jewish family. You know, my parents raised me with an interpretation of Islam that said that we could be friends with anybody in the world, anybody with good values, anybody in the world. And when I grew up, I went to work at the Wall Street Journal. I became a reporter in our Washington, D.C. bureau. And there, a joyful, engaging, happy young man came. His name was Daniel Pearl. He had moved from the Atlanta bureau. And I had just gone through a rough patch in my life, and I had gotten the good counsel to enjoy myself. Well, Danny became my passport to American culture that I had left behind in 6th grade when I learned to square dance. That was about as far as I got. I ended up playing beach volleyball with him behind the Lincoln Memorial. We went to listen to music. I learned to buy a CD for the first time in my life. Danny sent me out on an assignment, and I came back with a CD from a band named Meatloaf, the singer named Meatloaf, and Danny sent me back because he didn't approve. He didn't think that was good enough of selection. He was just a regular human being, but an extraordinary human being because he transcended all of the, divisiveness that exists out in the world to just know people as people. We ended up both in Pakistan after the 9/11 attacks as journalists, trying to make sense of this violence that had just happened, killing so many innocent people. I was first in Islamabad, and it was in Islamabad that I would go to these things called halakas, Quran study circles of the kind that Surya was talking about. And it was at those study circles that I would hear the conspiracy theories that it was the Jews and the Israeli intelligence agency Mossad that was behind the attack on the US. Danny also was a man who was hearing these things, and yet he was not engaging with any kind of anger or any kind of resentment. He was a journalist. He was also Jewish. His family also was rooted in the history of Israel. And then on a fateful day, January 23rd, 2002, Danny went off for an interview. He never returned. First, the men who had abducted Danny said that he was an agent for the CIA. And then, after they learned that he was Jewish, they said he was an agent from Mossad. They used Danny's Jewish identity and his roots in Israel to justify murdering him, beheading him, laying him, and then cutting him into pieces and burying him in the soil of Pakistan where his blood soaked into the earth. His parents lost their son, and they rose with grace and humanity to know that this was an interpretation of Islam that they were committed to defeating, and that I, as a Muslim, then embarked on a journey to also defeat. Just like all of the reformers here, Rahil, Zudi, Haris, Suraya, Zainab, we have been called every smear word in the book. I've been called a Zionist media whore because I dared to stand up for my friend who is Jewish. And this isn't just the stuff of history. Danny was kidnapped and murdered in 2002. But today, there are people in Pakistan who believe he is still alive and that it is a Mossad conspiracy to shame Pakistan. The men who were convicted in Danny's kidnapping and murder have been freed because two judges on the Supreme Court panel that listened to an appeal in these men's conviction ruled that they were innocent. And they too believed at the highest level of the judiciary that this was a conspiracy against Pakistan. Surya mentioned an existential threat that Jewish people in the state of Israel face. This tragedy of Danny's murder reminds us, tells me every single day that this is not some ethereal existential threat. This is targeted assassination of individual human beings. And we as Muslims have a duty to stand up for the humanity of all people, including our Jewish brothers and sisters. And so I'm so honored to join all of you today. Danny was a symbol of joyfulness and happiness. And it's in that spirit that I want us to continue to fight anti-Semitism with a goal of forging friendship amongst us, recognizing that in the middle is our humanity. So thank you so much, Raheel, for allowing me to be here today, and I will join you every step of the way.
Thank you, Asra. Thanks, all of you. I have a lump in my throat. This point that you made about humanity is so important. And let's hope that it is in the memory of Danny and many others like him that we continue with the work that we are all set out to do together at CMAA. We will never stop, because what we have learned so far from the speakers is that we have to battle this or fight this virus at so many levels: political, social, human level, theological. And I see from the questions coming in, there are a lot of queries which we will eventually address. Today is just the start. We have a long journey together, and we will do this with all our souls. At CMAA, we believe it is our obligation in particular, but not exclusively, to be at the forefront of confronting Muslim states and organizations that promote hatred and violence. The fight against anti-Semitism must also include concrete action and not just toothless condemnations of countries like the Islamic Republic of Iran, a world leader in the promotion of genocidal Jew hatred, anti-Semitic leaders like Turkey's Erdogan or the PA's Mahmoud Abbas, and entities like the Muslim Brotherhood or any of its offshoots that systematically promote the hatred of Jews in their rhetoric or educational systems. One person who has been actively engaged in doing just this is Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, who is the son of Syrian immigrants who fled Ba'athist oppression in 1966. Dr. Jasser is a physician, a former US Navy lieutenant commander, and president and founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, AIFD, a Phoenix-based counter-Islamism think tank founded in 2003. He is also a co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement and a former vice chair of the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, appointed by the US Senate from 2012 to 2016. It's a great pleasure to welcome you, Zuhdi.
Thank you, Raheel. And I can't tell you how important this is and how much of an honor it is to join my brothers and sisters in this effort. And in the short time I have, I think it's important for us to sort of look at what we're fighting and why we're fighting it when it comes to anti-Semitism. This is a natural process. I know some of the folks that are online may not have heard of some of us. Others may have been following us for many years and wondering, hey, what took so long to form this? And I think this is the work we've been doing anyway, but there's a process. Initially, we formed our American Islamic Forum for Democracy in 2003, right after 9/11, because we needed to show that there was a voice of Muslims that wasn't wedded to the conspiracy-minded, anti-Semitic, bigotry, Islamic State supremacism, and we realized that terrorism was a symptom of a bigger disease. Then, as many of you joined us in the Muslim Reform Movement in 2015, we joined efforts in many of our organizations to say, hey, we have a diverse ideological approach to Islam, but yet we unite in understanding that the primary cancer is political Islam, Islamic Republic concept, jihadist concept of their militaries, and that we wanted to defeat that. Now it's natural to start taking on the symptoms of some of those ideologies, and the primary, just like terrorism is a symptom, anti-Semitism is a symptom. And there's no greater threat to humanity, I think, than the pathologies that are behind anti-Semitism within the Muslim community. And I say that because you're talking about a quarter of the world's population. And I think many of us know it's not an accident that the Jewish people have been exploited by the Islamists as the other, as Harris said, and as we heard from Soraya from the pulpits, and as we heard from the heart-touching human story from Ezra, many of us have these stories of friends that we've had in the Jewish community. I remember that right after 9/11, I was taking part in a discussion group here, the Children of Abraham in Phoenix, and they were the first people to call me on 9/12 and touch base and ask how we're doing, and I couldn't believe it. As I opened my book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, I said I wanted to go get the bastards that next day and rejoin the Navy. And my Jewish friends were calling me when, in fact, it was Muslims that attacked our country. And I was horrified. But as a physician, I like to treat diseases, not symptoms. And if we're going to treat anti-Semitism, we have to recognize that it is as we say in medicine, a pathognomonic sign of a primary cancer. And the establishment of our community, the Islamist leaders, the imams, the Islamic organizations, the Muslim Brotherhood legacy groups, from the Islamic Society of North America to the Council on American Islamic Relations, which are born out of Hamas, born out of the Muslim Brotherhood, their supposed fight to, even when they say they're fighting anti-Semitism, behind the scenes, they still are reading from the same books with the same translations. I think, as you mentioned, some of the countries, Raheel, what's fascinating is the Abraham Accords recently, I think, turned a new page. That page is you see countries like the Emirates no longer simply doing lip service on fighting anti-Semitism. They actually, and this is again in an autocratic way, but it's still a way to move forward, their imams in the Emirates and Bahrain and in countries that now have begun to sign the accords, have begun to, from the pulpits, say that Israel is not only a friend of the Muslim community, but is a state that should be recognized. And I know there's a lot of questions about the theology in the Quran. How do we change that? My father did a translation. And in that translation, it's often, you don't have to change the Arabic script, but the English translations and interpretations are often quite debatable. And that's really where our work, we have to roll up our sleeves and do a lot of our work. Israel is the only state recognized in the Quran. So, in a controversial way, I don't think it's controversial. I'm a Muslim Zionist because I believe that Israel as a state is recognized in the Quran as the only state recognized by God. So we can talk about that. That's a longer conversation. But the Ilhan Omars of the world, the Linda Sarsours of the world, who work closely not only with the Muslim Brotherhood, but there's a nexus in the West, which now I think our organization here, the Council Fighting, Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, is here to tell everybody, hold on, it's not just the Islamists. There's a red-green axis out there of the left that's very anti-Semitic in some of its bastions. That, as we saw in the Women's March a few years ago with Linda Sarsour, Zahra Balloo, and others that are working closely with Louis Farrakhan's Nation of Islam, working closely with a lot of other folks. If you take the anti-Semitism out of that, the red-green axis will begin to fall apart because there's very little in common between the Islamist theocrats and the far left other than their common hatred. When I was on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, we went to Saudi Arabia 3 or 4 times, Egypt, Turkey, and other countries in which they're just so mired in anti-Semitism. If you look at the data of the State Department report on anti-Semitism, the percentage of anti-Semitic beliefs in the Middle East is low at 80% and average 90 to 95%. So it's not just Islamism. Pan-Arabism is a problem too. So you have a lot of fascist movements, whether it's the theocratic fascism of political Islam or nationalistic fascism of Arabism, that come together to form a brew in which the Jewish community is the primary target for their tribalism, if you will. And we have to fight that. And I think anti-Semitism, fighting that will bring up and the Arab awakening, if you will, brought a fact that those dictators are going to go away. And the dictators, when they go away, will sometimes leave a vacuum that might bring something worse. But that's the only treatment, is the defeat of that autocracy. So in the last minute, I think I want to tell you that what we're fighting against, these governments, the Erdogans of the world, have a large media apparatus. The Iranian Republic, the Islamic Republic, has a large media apparatus, press TV. And from the hundreds of millions that follow Al Jazeera and Qaradawi, he's one of the most powerful anti-Semites in the world. And he has a show called Sharia and Life that still, as he's over 90, is getting a lot of play. And on top of that, they push conspiracy theories. And we see a lot of the conspiracy theories from the far left and the Islamists coming together that we need to fight. But as you know, I mean, many of us, and it hit close to home to me when I had my friends in Israel sent me a note that, hey, Zudi, do you know that your organization is written about in Arabic as the enemies of Islam that are working with the Jews on an Al-Qaeda website in Syria? And I didn't know that at the time, but we saw that. It was written about at Memory. And, it sort of hit home that as my family was fighting chemical weapons against chemical weapons from the Assad regime, there were two enemies, two heads of that snake, which was not only Assad's fascism and Arabism and Baathism, but also political Islam and ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas. And that brew will only go away when we here in the West, sitting in the lap of freedom, have the courage to take on not only the symptoms of terrorism and anti-Semitism, but of political Islam. You can't just white out anti-Semitism. And this is one of the things when we went to Saudi Arabia, I talked to the royal family and others and said, listen, you guys, not only are your textbooks radicalizing our community, but you can't just sort of cross out the part that says Jews are apes and monkeys. You have to change the narrative. You have to change the narrative that Islam is the way to freedom, that actually every individual can be free, whether they accept Islam or not, whether they're Jewish, Christian, or atheist. And these narratives have to change. And I think that's one of the reasons Saudi has been slow to come to the Abraham Accords, because they realize that there's a supremacism to their ideas, but they're getting there. So when people ask, why are we doing this? And this is my last comment. It's about loyalty. I formed the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, not that I think that Islam needs me or any of us reformers to fix it. That's between a Muslim and God. But I do think that for my kids and my kids' kids, if we're honest with ourselves, we have to be honest to the truth and morality that every Jew, every Christian, every human being, every atheist is equal to me before God. There's no supremacists in our ideas. It doesn't matter what we believe. And if we're not honest about that our community leadership is not recognizing it, then we don't deserve the freedom that our Constitution in the United States gives us. And we have to be loyal to that truth in order to defeat it. So I'm honored to be with all of you, and thank you for leading us, Raheel.
Thank you, Zudi. What you have brought home, and all the other speakers as well, is to help the audience understand that what we have taken on is very challenging, and there is great pushback. And it is not going to be an easy task, but we will do it with your help. We invite you to engage with us in every way that you can and to spread the word, because this, as I said, is a global effort, not just the effort of a few people. So I would like at this point to mention that every voice counts. And here I would like to recognize in the audience Saleh Hudayar, who is Prime Minister of the East Turkestan government in exile. He has been working relentlessly for the freedom and rights of the persecuted Uyghur community and is passionate about exposing anti-Semitism and dealing with it. So we've heard from our Muslim panelists. Let me now introduce Harold Rode to present closing remarks. Harold is Distinguished Senior Fellow at the Gatestone Institute and Fellow at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. He served as advisor on Islamic affairs at the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He received his PhD from Columbia University in Islamic history, specializing in the history of the Turks, Arabs, and Iranian people. He also studied in the universities of Iran, Egypt, and Israel. Furthermore, Harold has studied in and traveled extensively throughout the Islamic world and has done research in universities and libraries in Egypt, Israel, Syria, Jordan, Iran, Afghanistan, Turkey, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan.
Enough.
That's a very impressive bio, Harold. I'm almost afraid to say that I call you a friend, but I do. So thank you for being with us.
Rahid, thank you so much. And thank you for asking me to do this, because it's for me an honor to be among all of you, because you're all brave, you're courageous, and you're fighting an uphill battle, which is unbelievably difficult. To say that I admire you is an understatement. I've lived in so many Muslim countries I'm 71, and I think I started this journey when I was about 15. And all I can say is I have nothing but the deepest respect and admiration for what you are all trying to do. Maybe just a few short remarks, because you are the stars, all of you who had spoken, I think, eloquently and movingly today. You're the stars. You're the ones that matter. Maybe I'll just make a few small remarks, and I'm happy afterwards, or through email or whatever, to discuss these things. Muslims have a choice. There are two sets of materials in the Quran about Jews. One is the pigs and apes, monkeys, and that's all there, and there's no question about it. There are other traditions as well, and as one of the other people who was listening today, actually, I once asked her about that. She said, Harold, they're there, but I choose to emphasize the other material in the Quran, which is how do we all get along together? And there are these traditions that Zuhdi mentioned today of Israeliyat. I think Haris also quoted particular verses from the Quran about this. And it says very clearly that God gave the land of Israel to the chosen people, to the Jews. That's there in the Quran. You obviously are, that you recognize that you see these things can be emphasized as well. It's up for Muslims to choose. And it is true from my experience, having been in many, many mosques and listened to sermons in Arabic, Turkish, and Persian over the years that I was traveling in these places. There's no question about it that what you all recognize and said, all of our speakers, is right. Now, the Abraham Accords were mentioned, and I want to mention how for the foreign minister, I'm reading his title because it's a little hard for me, Abdullah, who is the person who signed the accords in the Abraham Accords in Washington. He's the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the United Arab Emirates. I listened to him at a conference. The conference was in Arabic, and there were foreigners listening through translation. I was watching this on the net. And all of a sudden, a European woman asked a question, and the UAE foreign minister stops her cold and said, I want to speak to you. I want to answer you in English, so you get it right. And his English is as good, in fact, better than mine. And I'm a native English speaker. And here's what he said. He said, you Europeans, you Westerners, I'm going to quote him exactly. There will come a day when we will see far more radical extremists and terrorists coming out of Europe. He doesn't say America, but he means it as well, because of the lack of decision-making, trying to be politically correct, or assuming that they know the Middle East and that they know Islam and they know the others far better than we, Yani, that means the Muslim self. And he then ends and says, I'm sorry, this is pure ignorance. What word? He calls them radicals and extremists, the people that all of us, all of the panelists and myself so passionately oppose. He does not call them fundamentalists. And this is a key point. Why? Because if he called them fundamentalists, what he is saying is that you radical extremists, you political Islamists, whatever, you have, if he calls them fundamentalists, you're going back to the fundamentalists, and we in the Gulf are not. But his response is, we in the Gulf, we are going back to the fundamentals. I will not cede that territory, the fundamentals of Islam, to the radicals and the extremists. So I beg you all, use the word radicals and extremists, not fundamentalists. It's an uphill battle. We have real heroes who spoke today, not me. I'm just a retired dumb ex-government bureaucrat. You guys are leading the mission. It is our job from the outside to support whatever we can to make or help you succeed. Otherwise, we got a real problem. Who knows? One of the speakers said about a quarter of the world today is Muslim. What are we going to do? Kill everybody? You can't do such a thing. God forbid. You need compassion. Our job is to try to educate. And I will leave it here. I've talked enough. And Rahil, again, thank you so much for thinking of me. But I have one bone to pick with you that I wrote you about that I'm going to say. I met you from the first time that I met you. You are memorable is beyond recognition. I met you at a few times and had, fascinating conversations. What saddened me is that you didn't think I would remember you. You're a hero. You're a leader. We need you. And thank you for organizing this.
Thank you. Thank you, Harold. I hope my husband is listening. The rest of it doesn't matter.
I met your husband too, and you know that.
Yes, absolutely. Very, very profound. Thank you for speaking about the Abraham Accord, which there is hope. I'm an eternal optimist. I always believe there is hope, and we have to continue to build on that. Otherwise, we'll sink very deep. And it is critical that we further the understanding of the genocidal nature of anti-Semitism, which is why education is so important. We have to identify where it resides and multiply the numbers of those who will stand with us to abolish it. This task is too monumental for individuals. So we have to make this a global movement. We need your help. So please join us. It is not just enough to have dialogue about the urgent issue of anti-Semitism, although that is also important. But let us all make a pledge today and seize this opportunity to come together as human beings to work collectively. Our launch today is an invitation to the world that if you want peace, let's work for it together and support each other in making a difference. I want to give a heartfelt thanks to the illustrious speakers, to all of you for your interest and attention, for putting comments in the chat box, which we will get to. Also a special thanks to Nick and Phil for coordinating the event and the technical support. Thanks also go out to Rimel Khan and Vivian Zeiner for the outreach, plus Noor Dahri and Guido Smith for educating us. I know that we probably have left you with a lot of questions, but please know that this is an ongoing effort. It is a work in progress. Tell your friends about our website, www.stopglobalantisemitism.com, on which you will learn about our future events. So stay tuned. Peace, and inshallah, we will look forward to meeting in person in the near future. Thank you, salam, and shalom.